Hey everyone, this is Roger from Reanimated Stories, the host of Reanimated Stories. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than kind of the other episodes. I have a special guest. His name is Doug, and I have met Doug through a few things which you'll hear about in the podcast. But specifically, Doug does work with an organization, a global organization, specifically overseas called Love Justice International. And I wanted to just come on here just for a few moments before the episode to say that this is a little bit of a different episode. It will be a little bit heavier as the Love Justice International does deal with, and is involved with helping prevent human trafficking in all of its forms. Doug does share a few stories, and we do share a few statistics and different things. And it's also a faith based organization. So, a lot of the goal is that it is a gospel driven, faith based organization that helps prevent human trafficking. And I wanted to just come on here just to give you a heads up that this is a little bit of a different episode in that it is a little bit heavier, and that there are certain things, there are certain stories that are shared. Obviously, there's not like anything top secret or anything like that, but there are some things that are shared that do make this a little heavier. So I did want to just give you a heads up before you listen to that. Thanks so much for sticking with me thus far. This is now, we're well over 30 episodes. So thank you so much for sticking with me. And I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I am a supporter of Love Justice International. I do support them with some resources every project quarter and all that. Some of that does go to help Love Justice International. So thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
One time I was in Nepal, and Mike, the guy that I supported, who is now a physician and the chairman of the board, John, who's our CEO and founder, we met in Nepal, and John was telling us what he had heard that day. And that was that he had heard that over 10,000 girls are being trafficked annually from Nepal into India. And we didn't even know trafficking existed, basically. We hadn't even heard much about that ever. But when we heard that, we kind of looked at each other and said, okay, now that we know, what are we going to do?
Hey everyone, welcome back to Reanimated Stories. This is Roger, your host, and today I'm joined here. I was gonna say gathered. No, I'm joined here with Doug Dowark. We just were talking about his last name, and so I had to make sure I didn't want to mess that up. So hopefully I didn't mess that up. Doug, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Roger. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Doug and I had met through an event that, if you follow me on any social media or anything like that, or even my email, wherever, you'll see that I'm involved here in Austin in a group called, or an organization called Disrupt HR Austin. And with Disrupt HR, typically what they do and what we do is that we support an organization, and some change throughout the years and different. And at one point, what Disrupt HR Austin did is we had supported an organization called Love Justice International. And through that, I met Doug, and we were introduced to each other because they were like, Roger, you do tech or you do websites. So can you go help Doug figure out how to connect his computer to the TV? And I said, sure, why not? And so from that, it was a great conversation. We learned a little bit more about each other, just the cool things that Doug is involved with and does. And so, Doug, why don't you go ahead and take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, my title is global ambassador. I used to be executive director when we first started the work back in about 2004. So I work out of my home. I have an office at home, as I think all of us do in the States. So I work out of my home, and I oversee, or help to oversee, a lot of the stateside work. And then I travel overseas on occasions every year to check out some of the work that we do around the world. It's a privilege to be a part of this. I have to always make sure people understand what a privilege it is, even though the work that we do is oftentimes dangerous. It's oftentimes, well, most of the time, dark, and it's a tragedy that it even exists. But so I'm a father of 4 daughters, and I think that prepared me well for the work that we do. I can't imagine and hear the stories of individuals and their parents and relatives around the world that have lost a child into human trafficking. I think having 4 daughters prepared me for that a little bit. I have 15 grandchildren, more than half are girls, and 32 great grandchildren, and about 25 of those are girls. So I have a large family with a lot of females. And even though the work that we do isn't just sex trafficking, it also entails other types of trafficking, particularly labor trafficking. Sex trafficking is a primary focus and is probably the largest part of the work that we do.
Yeah. I did not realize that you had great grandchildren as well. So that is absolutely fantastic.
Christmas is a bite. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very expensive.
Yeah. Doug, tell us a little bit about tell us a little bit about Love Justice International. And you said that so you're a global ambassador. You were first the executive director. So tell us a little bit about what Love Justice International does and what your role is or has been
Sure.
in that.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe it's best if I just tell you a little bit about how it started, because there were
Yeah.
5 college guys from Taylor University that when they graduated from college, they got together and decided they wanted to do something where they would pour themselves out over about a 6-month period before they took on the next stage of their lives, whatever that was. Some were going to get jobs, some were going to grad school, one was going to med school. So these guys got together, prayed, got a map out, prayed over a map, just asking God to direct them someplace for 6 months. And they ended up going to Nepal. And as they say, it wasn't all for ministry. They knew that the Mount Everest was there and the Laitang mountain range, and they had this desire to go to base camp of Everest. So they decided to go to Nepal, went there, took a one-way ticket, got off the plane, immediately headed down to the tourist area. And they first thing they noticed down there was that just the huge number of young kids that were begging and selling drugs and just out of control in some cases. And they decided that they were going to hook up with a local ministry that ministered to those kids. So that's what they did. And then they also did that with a couple of children's homes. And one of those guys was from my church, and just an amazing guy. His mom actually was in a Bible study that I was teaching, and she asked me to kind of take care of him or look over him a little bit because she was dying from cancer and needed that father that was really involved in his life. And so we sponsored him when he was over there for 6 months. And when he came back, he got his support team together and shared with what God had done over that period of time. And he was convinced that God was to have him start a children's home. And he had some parents that were willing to do that. He had a home facility that they could have it in, but he didn't know how to raise the money or what the next steps were in that regard. He said, if anyone's interested in working that out with me, I'd love to talk to him after the meeting tonight. And so my heart about beat out of my chest because it's something I always wanted to do. And I basically just ran up and said, I'm all in, let's do it. And so we did start a children's home over there. Going over and seeing those kids for the first time when they moved into that home completely changed the whole trajectory of my life. I was 60, almost 60 at the time. And where most people were thinking about retiring, I was trying to figure out what were my next steps in life. And I really wanted to quit my job and to do that full time, realizing I wouldn't have an income. I didn't know what I was going to do to support myself and my wife. But long story short, quit my job, decided to do that full time. And we basically had a children's home ministry for 2 or 3 years before. One time I was in Nepal, and Mike, the guy that I supported, who is now a physician and the chairman of the board who lives in Portland, John, who's our CEO and founder, and he lives in South Africa, and myself, we're the executive committee. And we met in Nepal on the top of the roof of a guest house. And John was telling us what he had heard that day. And that was that he had heard that over 10,000 girls were being trafficked annually from Nepal into the brothels of India. And we didn't even know trafficking existed, basically. We hadn't even heard much about that ever. But when we heard that, we kind of looked at each other and said, okay, now that we know, what are we going to do? Is there something we should be doing? Is God saying, step up and step into this? And so we talked about it, and that was the kind of the seeds that were planted in our minds that this is a step we wanted to take outside of just operating a couple of children's homes. So my job was going back to the States and starting to raise money and an organization back in the US. And as executive director, I was pretty much responsible for the stateside work and the funding. I had never raised a dime in my life. I had no desire to do that. But I had this, I don't know, God just impressed upon my heart that I could do this and he would be doing it through me. And I didn't have to be concerned about not having experience. So I stepped into that reluctantly and with great trepidation. And we started to build out this work of anti-trafficking, starting in Nepal, moving into Bangladesh and India. And that was kind of the core of what we did for several years. And from there, now we're in 16, 17, 18 countries. I'm not exactly sure. And we have, I think, 13 family homes in Nepal and Bangladesh. So it's kind of really grown from there. And I stepped out of my role as executive director a few years ago. I'm old. And so there's things I just didn't want to do anymore. Most of it had to do with meetings and having people report to me. So I changed the I guess, job description of what I did to now where I'm more of just have opportunities to speak and to, I still raise some money, but I just don't spend a lot of time doing that. I go overseas and get to interact with the work that we do over there more often. And so my job now is something that I really, really enjoy. And I think for the remaining time that I'll be with the ministry, I'll be able to do something that I really love that much. So that's kind of just a little bit of, I think, the history of for me and a little bit for Love Justice.
Yeah, wow, that's really incredible. So I didn't realize that it had started as a home, and
Hmm.
then from that you saw the need. So you said about 13 homes
Hmm.
currently in different areas. That's really fantastic. And so you're helping them with that trafficking aspect and then also bringing them in. Can you speak a little bit to that? We hear about human trafficking, whether it's labor, whether that's sex
Hmm.
trafficking, all of that, all over, whether it's here in the US or across the seas and anywhere like that. But what is it that is unique about Love Justice International in the way that they approach trafficking and how they combat it and all that?
Yeah, we do think it's pretty unique. It's called transit monitoring is the strategy that we employ. And that's basically a preventative strategy. So it we intercept and prevent girls and boys from being trafficked before the damage is done, before they're actually trafficked into a situation that's going to create horrible outcomes for them. And so we station monitors at train stations, bus stations, railroad stations, high traffic highways, roads between countries. And we look for, I think we have maybe 30 red flags, and we look for as many of those red flags as we can as we observe people in those particular places. And after we've determined enough red flags exist, then our monitors are trained to separate the trafficker and the girls or boys that are being trafficked, and we work close by a local policeman, and we will call the policeman over and we'll separate them. We'll ask them the same set of questions. If their answers don't match up, that's a strong indication that there's a trafficking situation in progress. So the police will take the trafficker to jail. We'll put the girl or boy or whatever in a safe house. Sometimes there's multiple victims at the same time.
Wow.
And we'll make sure that before we return them home, that it's a safe environment for them to be returned to. Because oftentimes, if it's a real poor situation, there's a chance they can be re-trafficked if we're not really careful about where we place them again. So, there's just a lot that goes on. We have situations where we've intercepted babies that were being trafficked, for example, for human sacrifice. We've had several situations where young boys were being trafficked for organ harvesting. So it's not just sex trafficking and labor trafficking, it's all kinds of evil stuff. And if we can use our strategy as transit monitoring to prevent those things, those outcomes, it's such a better situation than going in and rescuing after the fact. Plus, it's, and I hate to put a dollar sign or a figure on a person that we intercept, but it only costs us about $112 to intercept and prevent an individual from being trafficked. And On the other side of that, rescues are in the thousands of dollars to rescue one individual. So from an economic standpoint, it makes sense as well, even though that's not the primary reason we do what we do. And I want to make sure that you understand that we also support rescues and are involved with some rescues with other organizations.
I think that was one of the big things that really stuck with me when I first was talking with you, Jason, and a few of the other ones at LJI was the fact that it was a preventative measure, and that may not be sexy or cool or make a great movie necessarily,
Right.
but it's the thing that is done beforehand, and something that I didn't realize after until we had chatted was the idea of okay, so they have been led this far, but then when they go back, one, there is the issue that if they're in a poor situation, they may get back into that. But the second thing is that there is shame that is involved with that. There is a cultural and a economic impact on them. And so taking care of them alongside with, as you mentioned, other organizations, I think is probably something that is really interesting in how you do that. And obviously, you said there's an economic, factor to it, which isn't the main thing, but it's if we take the same amount of money that we're raising, and it's like we're able to get more out of it in the sense that we're able to prevent, we're able to support, we're able to help and continue that progress. I think that's a huge, I think that's a huge benefit, and so that's really awesome.
Yeah.
What are oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Were you gonna say
No,
something?
that's fine. No, that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really great. Continuing on with that idea of support, what are some ways in which LJI Love Justice International helps support these victims afterwards?
Yeah, we associate with several other NGOs, some that will do aftercare. And so we don't try to be the best at everything in the world. We feel like we're the best at what we're called to do, and that is to employ a transit monitoring strategy that prevents girls and boys from being trafficked. So we identify other organizations that have expertise in aftercare, for example, whether it be education or helping them find a job or whatever. Sometimes we even work with an organization that can house girls temporarily until they can be returned home if we don't have a facility in the area that we could do it ourselves. We know that poverty is a primary driver of human trafficking in a lot of the countries where we work, if not most. And so it's, it's important, I think, that we find ways that we can support those girls and boys once we intercept them to not just put them back in the same kind of environment that's going to create the potential for them to be trafficked again. So we do work alongside organizations that supply that kind of expertise and have opportunities available to these kids that we intercept and prevent.
Yeah, no, I like what you just said, that we're not trying to be the master of everything, like we don't
Yeah,
have to be. And I think that brings a lot of collaboration just in general based on what you do. In taking this not necessarily in a different direction, but one of the ways in which you support is that not only are you just doing this, but you're also a faith-based organization. So they're also in part of that care. They're getting the gospel. Like, are they also receiving care, like in a spiritual sense, not just like maybe economic and physical, but in other ways as well, emotional, spiritual, different areas?
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's the primary focus of the work that we do. We're not just an organization that does physical intervention, but we want to do spiritual intervention as well. And the gospel is the primary focus of all the work that we do. In fact, every project that we operate, every transit monitoring station that we have staff and we do work in, those are all overseen by the local church. And the pastor usually is the head of those particular areas, and they hire the people that work in them, and then we supply the funds and the training to make sure that it's done the way that we think it's effective. But every opportunity that we get for every girl or boy that we intercept, we try to include an opportunity to present the gospel. And in our safe houses, we have materials and videos that also present the gospel. Some countries, Nepal being one that has pretty strict rules against sharing the gospel. And if you do and are caught, it's like a 5-year sentence and then immediate expulsion from the country if you're not a citizen there. So our staff operates at some risk in a lot of the countries where we work. And they're willing to do that, and they're willing to be creative in how they present the gospel. But the gospel is the primary focus of the work we do, all the work that we do. And if we don't share the gospel both in word and deed, then we haven't shared the full gospel in our estimation.
Yeah, that's powerful. And that was really one of the things that really drew me to Love Justice, just in supporting, but also just hearing that story. Is that it really is, it's a gospel driven organization. And I think that's really awesome because just like you said, it's not just a physical thing, right? There's economic, there's spiritual things, and presenting that gospel is really important. So that's really cool. And you just mentioned that they're also operating in a environment to where it's really risky for them to be able to do that, and that shows a lot for the mission.
Yeah,
So you had
there's no.
mentioned, oh
I'm
no, go
sorry.
ahead. Okay.
I was just going to say, there's no doubt the people on the ground in the places where we work, they're my hero. They put their life on the line in many cases in the countries where they work, and they're on the ground 24/7 doing the kinds of work that no one wants to do. I've been in those places when I visit, and I watch what they do, and I watch how they put themselves at risk to do that work.
Mm.
So I pray for them. I am so pleased to work alongside them. They are just an amazing group of people, and I'm thankful that God raised them up to do this kind of work.
And the people that are there, without obviously getting into too much detail, are they citizens of that area? Because you had mentioned about them being,
Yeah.
if they don't, okay,
Yeah. Two things. The people that we hire are believers. They're nationals because of culture and
yeah,
language. And we want to
yeah,
empower the church. And so all that works together to in the way we employ people.
that's cool. That's really awesome. So here we're talking about what Love Justice does in a preventative way with transit monitoring and all that. So how is that different? Because we were talking, so that's preventative versus going in, kicking down doors, right? That sort of thing and all that. How is that different and how does that differ? What are some pros and cons? Not like pros and cons, but more like how does that help you guys stand apart in what you're doing? But also be able to work with other organizations in what you're doing and talk a little bit about transit monitoring. I know you just did, but
A little
kind of
bit
give a
more.
little bit onto what you're doing.
Um, I think sometimes it's really difficult to contrast the two because no girl or boy should be for sale.
Yeah.
There should be no question about that. No matter if you're a transit monitor or a rescue organization or a aftercare organization, whatever that is, we should all be working together for the one goal of making sure that not one more boy or girl is ever sold into slavery. Sometimes it's hard for me to talk about the differences, but I think the one thing that I would say is that to tell a story about the difference. And I'll make it brief because it could get kind of long. But I was in Nepal one time and I was on the border, Kartavita, in one of the places where we work. And I was in our safe house where we place the girls and boys we intercept until we can return them home or place them with another NGO that's going to work with them. And I'm standing there and there's a girl, probably 12, 13 years old. And we're in the living area and the parents of the safe home were standing there with us. And all of a sudden the door opens and we were waiting for this girl's parents to come and pick her up. And the door opens and the father and mother walk in and they immediately come over and fall at my feet. I have nothing to do with it. I'm over there observing. They think because of I'm American that I was the one that did preserved their daughter. But they fall at my feet and they kiss my feet and they look up to me and they're just tears streaming. And they just kept saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You preserved my daughter's life." And I thought at the time I was thinking of my four daughters and I was thinking, what would I feel like if all of a sudden I sent my daughter off to get a job, thinking she's going to get a job, and I never hear from her again? I don't know where she is. I don't know what she's enduring. That's what we're preventing. We're preventing not only the preservation of a girl or a boy, but we're preventing and saving the preservation of a family, and oftentimes a whole family of relatives and even a little community. Now, all of them are impacted by trafficking. And if we prevent one from being trafficked, that that impacts a whole community of people. That is so different than rescue, where you go in after the fact, maybe years, and you finally find somebody that you've been wanting to find for years and years and years. And the damage that's done to them is unspeakable. And they just will never fully recover. You can't all of a sudden make them whole after what they've endured. So do we want to rescue them? Absolutely. Get them out of that kind of environment forever. But it just makes so much more sense for us if we can prevent that rather than go in after the fact and rescue them. So there's a huge contrast between those two, which are the two major anti-trafficking strategies. And I'd hate to dwell on too much because as I said a couple of times, we do both in some regards. We do some rescues or assist in some rescues as well. We feel strongly about both, but we feel more strongly about the work that we're doing with our transit monitoring strategy because of the prevention of the damage.
Yeah, and also just like what you had said earlier, we're not trying to be a master of everything. Like they're and you're partnering with those, you're
Exactly.
assisting with that. Yeah, no, I totally hear that. And that's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that with us because that is impactful to prevent that and to see that kind of played out there. One question that might be if people are listening that might be on their mind. It's called Love Justice International. So was there a reason why it's just overseas and maybe not in the US?
Yeah, that's a good question because I get asked that a lot. It's just, are you doing this work in the U.S.? And I go, no. We have tried along the Mexico California border, and it didn't work. It just didn't work with the U.S. government and with the Mexican government. So
Yeah, yeah.
it was just not a fit. We did start to work in Alaska, and it didn't work as well. So we've made attempts in the U.S. in a couple of places, but we decided that our work seems to work best primarily in the countries that are the poorest and the most underserved. And we also came to the conclusion that since the majority of trafficking goes on in the countries where we work, like India and Bangladesh and Nepal and Myanmar and that particular area. And then also in Africa, there's several countries that have huge trafficking issues: Uganda, Kenya, South Africa. So we work in these countries that we've identified as probably going to give us the highest opportunity to impact the most lives possible. And we realize that if we can impact, the more lives we impact in those particular areas are going to actually impact the countries where we aren't working, like the US. A lot of girls, for example, will be shipped from those particular areas of the world into the US and trafficked into the US. If we can prevent them from being trafficked over there, that's going to impact the trafficking issue in the US as well. So it does have an effect on trafficking worldwide, even though we're only working in primarily Asia and Africa at this time. Now, we continue to expand. We've identified several more countries we'd like to move into as soon as we can secure funding to do that. But primarily, we work in, as one of our core values is help those who need it the most. And we feel like in the underdeveloped poor countries, that's where the help is needed the most. And that's where we're going to probably continue to work.
Yeah, that's really cool. You had or Love Justice had at the time of this recording about a week or so ago had come out with a blog talking about I think it was like myths or misconceptions of trafficking worldwide, but specifically in the US. And I would if readers or listeners are still wondering about that, I would highly recommend you go check out that blog as it does have some really interesting
Yeah.
insight into what Doug is talking and specifically about the US and all that. And that makes sense. Yeah. And it's a shame that different governments not to get political, but different governments and how it was difficult. But yeah, I think what you had mentioned, shipping from one to another, if we can
Yeah.
prevent, that's where that big impact is going to be made. So I appreciate that.
Yep.
Doug, if somebody is listening and they're like, I want to be involved, I want to give, I want to figure out, I want to find a little bit more out about Love Justice International, where is it that they can go to find out more about Love Justice and maybe the topic in general and how they can, if they want to be involved,
Yeah.
involved?
Lovejustice.ngo is our website. And it's got everything on it. So the countries where we work, and the good thing is I just want to share just a quick shout
Yeah.
out to our team because just in the recent last month or so, we went over 100,000 intercept mark. We've
Wow.
intercepted 100,000 individuals since we started doing this work, and we have helped incarcerate over 2,100 traffickers around the world. So the work is going on. It's growing. It's having impact, and you can find that information on our website. And I would encourage you to go. And there's articles to read, and there's opportunities if you want to give. There's opportunities if you want to pray. There's opportunities if you want to look for possible jobs. All that's on our website.
That is really incredible. Thank you for sharing that, Doug. So we will also have all those links down in our down in the description of the podcast
Awesome.
and the video as well.
That's
If you are
awesome.
looking to be involved in that, definitely check out those links and also connect with Doug. Doug, where can they connect with you if they wanted to connect with you personally or just see the work that you're doing as well?
Yeah, I mean, they could I give him my phone number even. I mean, I love to talk to people about this work. Yeah, if you want to connect with me personally, my phone number is 402 440 4275. And I'm not afraid to give that out because I give it out everywhere I go. Because if people have questions and they need a direct answer, I'm available. I'm old. I don't have anything. I don't do anything major except this work and with my church. And so I have time and I'm happy to talk to you if you want to talk.
That is that's wonderful. Thank you. I will make sure that gets there as well because people do need a resource, right? People do need it. They may have questions. Hey, how can I get involved? But also, hey, I have this question because I see these things happening, or how can
Yep.
I do that? That's great. So to hear from somebody that is doing that is really wonderful. Well, Doug, I really appreciate you coming out today and chatting with me. That was really wonderful. I hope that people were moved by that and hopefully that they will want to learn a little bit more and how they can get involved with that. Doug, thank you so much for chatting with me today and telling us about the important work that you and your team are doing.
Thank you for having me, Roger. I really appreciate the opportunity. God bless you.